Hi, my name's Jonathan Greenhause, and I'll be your tour guide here through the Joule Electric parking lot in beautiful Jersey City. Welcome to spring. First off, I'd like to thank Ethan Galvin for offering me this opportunity to participate in the Hoboken Public Library's Positively Poetry Reading Series to celebrate Poetry Month and specifically National Library Week. If you're unfamiliar with my poetry, you're not alone. A recent poll shows that 99.97% of Americans have never heard of Jonathan Greenhause. All that changes now. I'm prepared to go viral, as is inevitable when you're a middle-aged poet without a master's degree in anything. So, without further delay, I'll spring into my reading. And I'd like to start off with a little-known fact. New Jersey is where it all began. The origin of life. The origin of life unfolded somewhere in New Jersey. Not the beginnings of my own relatively insignificant life, but of all organisms that have ever been known to exist. This is not scientific theory, but rather my flawed personal belief, my wistful heart responding to Bruce Springsteen lyrics, to cellular genesis in proximity to alkaline hypothermal vents. It's a state of mind with no discernible borders, the logical starting point to a new philosophy. Pulled over at any Jersey Turnpike exit, breathe in these chemicals we're composed of, then recite the opening lines of Leaves of Grass. One self I sing, a simple, separate person, yet utter the word democratic, the word en masse. Then let Whitman guide us to where it commenced, where our nature's a pinball machine, our cells constantly colliding. So now, maybe you'll understand Jersey's as ridiculous a place as any for it all to have begun. And why not, right? The scientists are still trying to figure that one out. Of course, maybe it wasn't like that at all. Maybe it was more like this. A small dot appears, a genesis, a thing out of nothing. It's a black dot immersed in a blank, well, I thought this was going to be totally perfect, but no. I will reread this poem. It is called A Small Dot Appears, a Genesis, a Thing Out of Nothing, bored with itself in this inescapable panorama of darkness. It's a black dot immersed in a black canvas, negating its presence. And so the dot turns itself yellow through pure determination. Its amorphous boundaries suffused by yellowness, though there's nothing else. No rib to give, no earth from which to form an other, no celestial objects letting loose their nuclear elements. And just as its black became yellow, the dot wills itself company, creates a spherical congregation of yellow dots surrounding it. It's soon self-satisfied, in control, at peace with itself. But at some point, one of the dots wills itself from yellow to pink. Then one becomes green, and another erupts into violet. Soon the black universe is swarming with different colored dots, multiplying, becoming chairs and people sitting on those chairs, and clothes keeping the people warm, because now there's hot and cold and a contrast between the two. Now there are circus clowns and accredited carpentry schools. The yellow dot can't decide if this is good or not. It wants to protect its yellowness, its roundness, convince the other dots to remain the same, to foster their preservation. But it's too late. At every turn, there are supernovas and nebulae, fleece jackets and poutine, fried chicken wings, grains of sand and ocean crests, giraffes and deciduous leaves. Nothing can restrain this monumental tide of newness, this alternate universe ambivalent to the yellow dot's plight. Yet even at its most despondent, the dot finds solace in gumballs, in tennis balls, and traffic lights. It mutters quixotically to itself about self-determination, how everything around it is a result of that initial desire. that willed metamorphosis from what it was to the mysterious conclusion it hankered to be. Even now, when it seems everything's turned against it, the dot knows in its mythical center it has attained sublimity. Through the miracle, it exists. Meanwhile, I am surrounded by the urban miracle of singing birds and the rumble of occasional freight trains, which I'm hoping will make a cameo appearance at some point in this video. Even life in the city can't completely divorce itself from nature, and the following poem is testament to that. And I will read it in a second when I can attest to it. And here it is. Thanks a lot, Shakespeare, for the starling. The window, single-paned to preserve not heat but historical significance, presses down upon the simple plank preventing it from shutting. And in that humble rectangular board, there's a hole through which reasoning escapes. A metallic accordion-like tube stretching from the dryer's back end to the opening where the starling enters, where it places twig after twig to construct a metaphor for impracticality and absurdity, a snapshot of modern life, of our climatic uncertainty, like building a home on the rim of a smoldering caldera, its flimsy walls trembling. In 1890, 60 starlings were released in Central Park by the American Acclimatization Society because Shakespeare made mention of them in Henry IV, Part 1, wrote, "Nay, I'll have a starling shall be taught to speak, nothing but Mortimer, and give it to him to keep his anger still in motion." By the end of the play, the battle rages on, the 100 Years' War still unresolved. Now we've got over 200 million starlings in North America. My wife and I let it stay. We hang wet clothes upon the backs of chairs, upon our shower rod, learn to harness solar energy. We do, without these modern conveniences, teach our two sons to appreciate the subtle rumblings of an egg set to crack, a fledgling poised to press its luck upon the edge. It's hard to find the right balance here in Hudson County, one of the densest population centers in the country. Sometimes you have to go far, far away to find some peace of mind. Around 14 years ago, I took a trip to Japan to visit one of my cousins and decided to climb Mount Fuji. This poem starts at the base of the volcano shortly before I begin my descent. Departing from Sengen Jinja, as we can hear the children screaming from the playground. I arrive at Fuji Yoshida Station with all the necessary supplies. Warm clothes and water, first aid kit, and raincoats. And on the way to Sengen Jinja, I pick up some onigiri, vinegar rice stuffed with salmon and tuna wrapped in dried seaweed. At the shrine at Mount Fuji's base, I eat linguine with white clam sauce, heated up at the 7-Eleven. Gulp it down with a liter of grapefruit juice, then ring a rusted bell tied at the top of a frayed rope. Try to invoke the temple's saints. I clap my hands twice and bow, eyes closed for a small eternity, before passing beneath a multitude of stone and wood torii gates, which resemble the Chai, Hebrew letter of life. Several minutes later, there's a twist in the dusty road that I can choose to follow or not. A picnicking family warning me to remain on the well-worn path. But I reject their advice, take an uncertain turn, and find myself alone in the forest, ascending Fuji's slopes till the path all but disappears, the sound of cars drifting away. Clouds unleash a lightning storm, sending me cowering as bolts split the moss-covered labyrinth of conifers around me, striking to my left and right, unloosening a torrential shower soaking my clothes. But it's a warm rain, and there's absolutely no one else on this trail, the tangled path winding on indefinitely, and I'm quite sure I've never been this happy in my life. I've since been much happier, having met my wife shortly after that trip, followed by the births of my two sons a few years later. But all is not unbridled joy. There are starts and stops. There are breathtaking Goraiko sunrises at the top of Mount Fuji, preceding the subsequent drop to the valley below. The next two poems are about these highs and lows, naming things and Why my kid sobs at the ice cream parlor. Naming things. Naming things can create confusion, like saying within my wife's womb a blueberry-sized object resides, when all it is a blastocyst, or a fetus, or our own imagination, an elaborate gag perpetrated by sonograms and doctors paid to pretend it's something more than nothing, since last time, nothing came of this. First a blueberry, becoming a raspberry, becoming a grape, becoming an apricot, becoming untenable, non-viable. What was a miracle was relabeled a mistake, an error masquerading as the invention of starlight, become a black hole, swallowing our aspirations, a consumption of dizzying light offering us a pale reflection of our presence. And so we try again and again, our road to fertility paved with the occasional none of your business comments. And now this, another blueberry. At 7 weeks, this is the shape it takes. Somewhere deep inside feeds off what my wife's feeding it. Like this morning, yogurt. This afternoon, tortilla chips. If we said it were the size of a molar or an M&M or dog food pellet, would our feelings toward it suddenly change? How does it grow there in the darkness? We stare at each other and laugh, knowing how little we know, how this could end up like last time. But still we try because naming things can create confusion when they're not named right. But sometimes, by naming things, we can bring them into being. And just to prove that joy is eternally elusive, here's a poem that takes place at Tirico's, a beloved decades-old institution here in downtown Jersey City. This is Why My Kid Sobs at the Ice Cream Parlor. Because what he ordered isn't the flavor he secretly wanted but neglected to tell us. Because it's messy like the sweetest massacre, dripping down the cone, sticking up his fingers, staining the sidewalk with splotches, spotting his sneakers with liquid pox. Because it lessens like a snowman in the sun, is almost done, then he craves more. Because we're all going to die, someday, and all the ice cream in the world will in no way prevent this. Because his jumbo-sized serving of chocolate chip should have more chips, more chocolate. Because his lips are Arctic numb, because his role in this indulgence wholly depends upon our generosity and regrettably little upon his Lilliputian agency, because ice cream sold primarily in summer, and summer's knocking on winter's freezing doors, because the ice cream calendar resets, meaning we won't go out for any tomorrow, because of the ongoing war in Syria, affecting him subconsciously as he smears himself with strawberry sauce. Because ice cream's a metaphor for sweetness turning sour, our healthy appetites converted into pancreatic maladies, our boundless joys becoming diabetes. Because he loves his mom and me, but feels torn because he feels he loves ice cream more. Because the cone broke, because the sprinkles plummeted in a murder-suicide, because he ate the tiny napkin adhered to the cone, because he wishes to return home and, when he does, swears he said he wished to stay. Because his logic is far from airtight, barely registers as logical. Because he wants to live in the ice cream parlor forever, but the scoopers and cashiers won't let him stay. Because his fluctuating emotions are the crests and troughs of a tumultuous ocean. Because my cone had more ice cream, and when I tried to share it, he realizes the flavors I'd chosen were so much better than his. True story. It's hard being a kid, as evidenced by the many temper tantrums my wife and I have witnessed right in our own home. But things could always be worse. Luckily for you, my virtual audience, I'm about to share something which is not a Holocaust poem. And yes, it's literally titled, Not a Holocaust Poem. This is about happy thoughts, puppies and golden fields of wheat. And nothing's lurking in those fields. No concealed message threatening to break the peace and quiet. No serial killers stalking in the shadows, and even the shadows are comforting, their darkness offering forgetfulness and sleep. No unexpected illnesses hide here, no rising fevers incapable of being broken by antibiotics or by buckets of ice. And even those buckets of ice are only used to keep the champagne chilled or to engage the curiosity of the previously mentioned puppies. No fiancés will disappear, inexplicably taken from us in a confusion of smoke and fire, leaving us to make sense of lives we must now live alone. No, this isn't that kind of poem. And in these pages, you'll meet the love of your life and live happily ever after, because this isn't a Holocaust poem. No matter how much you fear it'll become one, paranoid the next line is certain to bring an improbable twist. When you get there, it's just a box of puppies, and you smile as you lift each one, and pretend this is really happening, just as you wished it to. So, from that puppy-filled poem, I'll take you to some future metaphysical pasture, a setting we may all find ourselves in eventually. Cows and daffodils. What if death were as uncertain as being alive? Let's say we're transported to a huge field of cows and daffodils when we die, and we're there all alone, each individual left with an infinite number of cows and daffodils. We can't measure the time there. We have no idea if this is it or not, if it's heaven, hell, or purgatory, and no one's here to greet us, to provide us with information. We just arrive in the middle of this huge field of cows and daffodils, and there's no sun, yet somehow there's a sort of unwavering light. There's no hunger, thirst, heat, or cold, no bodily function to fulfill. There are only cows and daffodils. And the cows stand aimlessly, look back and forth without doing much of anything. And that's when you realize you've possibly been sent to the wrong place. In the comings and goings of millions of recently deceased people, perhaps you've been sent to cow heaven or hell, to cow purgatory. Since cows are everywhere, but you're the only person in sight, and you have no way of knowing how long you've been here, or when you're leaving, or if you'll ever leave. After some rumination, you realize maybe you've always been here, or merely dreaming of what you thought was your former life. It could be a matter of time before you're plucked from this precarious existence to start a new life, perhaps as a cattle rancher in a daffodil field. Or this is what death's like, and it's high time you got used to it. There have got to be worse places to end up, and better ones too. This next poem is situated right in Hoboken itself, both the site of Frank Sinatra's birth and the first sale of the Oreo. I'm sure you all have opinions about which is better. Here's Lackawanna Station turns into Lackawanna State-on, the absence of its electric N and I changing our perception. A short circuit slowly starting its slide into extinction, as the glimmering crimson reflection upon the Hudson River's waves empties into the sea. Hoboken's Lackawanna is accompanied by a nearby McDonald's metamorphosed into McDonald's, its French fries belonging to a newly invented corporation, but still tasting the same. Perhaps a generator blew in a cataclysmic scene of smoke and fire, or better yet, eased into oblivion, the neon letters losing their plugged-in vibrancy, like a lit fuse's predictable march towards self-destruction. At some point, a nearby emergency exit becomes M-Gen X, and maybe all this will lead to our deaths, telltale signs our society slipping into anarchy, while illuminated by impartial lights decorating the riverside in an array of sickly structures that might never be righted again. I searched for other signs, ones half-eaten by neglect, ones too poor to make themselves complete. These are hard times, the world reflected in its gaps, in the spaces in between here and there. But in the midst of all these glowing or darkening failures, the half-moon's reflection ripples in the middle of the Hudson, this waning mood that 1 week ago was still full too, and will be once again. And isn't spring all about hope and new beginnings, about believing in the transformative nature, of Easter and baseball's opening day and Gloucester's Cooper's Hill cheese rolling race? Okay, maybe not that last one. This next poem is the shortest one I'll read today, and it's based on the famous French expression, une hirondelle ne fait pas le printemps. I ask forgiveness from any French people listening for having just butchered your beautiful language. A single swallow doesn't signal spring. One hurricane might not portend apocalyptic ends, nor certainly presume collective doom. One winter storm won't keep our skin from getting warm, nor cause the snow to infinitely grow. A single swallow doesn't signal spring, though on its wings the winter's end is written in. And from these spring-bearing swallows, I'd like to invite you into the zoo, which is my home, Animal House. A dolphin backflips in the bathtub, sardines circle in the sink, a boa's curled around the shower rod, and a troop of capuchin monkeys claim ownership over our medicine cabinet. Up and down the hall, cheetahs sprint, while a polar bear snacks on salmon in our fridge, and penguins stake out the freezer. Our master bedrooms host to mating season, to shrill peacocks showing off, caribou locking horns, sea lion bulls shoving aside their blubbering competitors. Satin sheets are overrun by snake dens slithering warmth. Walk-in closets become caves for a colony of vampire bats, bloodthirstily swinging from hangers, or wooden walls, now windows, through which termites chow. In the dining rooms, a carnivore's delight, a place where prey fear to go, while lions, wolves, and crocodiles wait patiently besides the algae-addled swimming pool. Regardless of our apartment's rare amenities, no buyer seems interested, and our pets too, an apathetic dog and a apoplectic cat, are no fonder of our menagerie, prefer the dullness of our back porch, from which they watched the advancing sea. As you may have guessed, that poem wasn't entirely based on facts. We don't actually have a back porch. This next poem, however, is rooted in reality, as far as I can tell. A poem written in my past life as a 15th century Georgian monk. Wouldn't start off like this. Would be surprised to find itself engaged in English, written from the perspective of a 21st century American. Everything would be unsettling. The free verse, the abrupt line breaks, the passing allusion to the Soviet Union. What's a Soviet Union? What's American? The poem would invariably question its own existence, would doubt the veracity of its origins, yet revel in its incongruity, in its ability to transcend its beginnings. The Georgian monk would stare back at the page, marveling at his absurd creation, hardly giving himself time to let the ink dry, yet every errant word would discover its place. He'd come back to the poem, crafting lines inspired by prayers, or by the lack of them, and a hole would grow inside of him, greater than the bones trapping it in. He'd stuff it with orations, with a plunging of his hands into the soil of the monastery's garden, digging roots out, ingesting them, then adding a stanza about the Kardashians, imagining how this praise would surely please the heavens. I don't remember much from that past life, but I do remember a few things which led me to write the following poem, which I'll further explain right afterward. From Out of the Darkness. The general presses the trigger of the pistol pointed towards the prisoner, and it clicks, its barrel empty. It's 1978, an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. Or maybe it was by Mar del Plata, but then Berto would have smelt the sea. He slips in and out of time until he's out of it. The handcuff fastened to his left wrist, married to its twin around the metal pipe beneath the bathroom sink. Berto hums in darkness, dreams of diving into a bubbling cauldron where bodies displace water, where raptors fill the air with their shrieks. The man with the gun gives it another try, caresses the trigger till Berto detects that weak metallic click, the sign it's empty still. It's 1978, and he's been locked up in this bathroom for almost a year. He is occasionally treated to a rapid jolt of electricity. Still, he can't reveal to them what he doesn't know, though the darkness is a truth serum. And Berto starts to think, perhaps the answers are hidden within, are prizes in a cereal box no one will ever extract, or a plot so nefarious he never admitted to himself. It's 1978, and Argentina's in the process of national reorganization, is an open wound on a steer set for slaughter, and the darkness is a hallucinogen, a catapult for the creative mind, a canvas ripped to shreds so he can begin again. The man with the pistol unlocks the cuffs and whispers, "Hoy te vamos a liberar, Berto," dangles his freedom in front of him like a fever dream. The two of them march single file through the outdoor markets, though through its bustle of activity, the pistol pointing into Berto's back, the general's voice detached, ordering him to walk, to never turn around. Berto steps, takes another step, every footfall a lifetime, every snapshot of the crowded market the last image he'll ever see. It's 1978, and the darkness somehow, magically, is butchered, is devoured by a shocking flash of light. So that poem was inspired by a man I met on a 17-hour bus ride from Buenos Aires to Mendoza, and the details are the ones that he gave when we spoke. There were many other Argentines like him who were imprisoned and tortured during this dirty war, and he was one of the lucky ones who actually did survive. Okay, I've got just 2 more poems to read in this fantastic series put together by Ethan, and I'd like to thank him once again for inviting me to take part. Poetry is alive and well in Hoboken, in Hudson County, in New Jersey, in the US, and in the whole world, mainly because poetry is always relevant, and it always has the capacity to express life in all its fullness. Make every month your poetry month, and be a beacon of light wherever you are. With that said, beacons of light. The sea will claim what belongs to the sea, says my son at age 6. We're steering a rusted fishing vessel in the middle of the Atlantic. Cattle soar above us in a jetliner heading to pasture land. The sea's just another word for oblivion, says my son, as he reels in another refugee and gently hugs her, wraps her in the emergency mylar blanket. He pulls out a cell phone, activates Google Translate, and the woman's Arabic becomes, "Your president is a vulture with a hunger for its own eggs," as she pleads to be taken somewhere else, maybe Canada. The other refugees nod their heads, tell tall tales of a distant Manitoba. The sea will devour our beacons of light in their death throes, says my son as he leaps overboard, dives beneath the sky's reflection, saves a small shivering boy barely distinguishable from himself. My final poem, Post 11, is also the last poem of my second chapbook, Secret Traits of Everyday Things. It's one of a number of poems I wrote about 9/11, and here it is, Post 11. The attack didn't happen right away. Years passed by and we were still waiting for it, each morning checking the news and expecting the worst. Some of us took precautions, stocking up on canned goods, on oxygen masks, on backup generators. Others wrote last wills and testaments. Time went on, and people began to drop their guard. Editorial pieces about the constant dangers from within gave way to simple recipes for hardworking people on the go. We devoted less time to what might possibly happen, instead going to the movies, traveling to national parks, and picking up hobbies like stamp collection or model trains. And we told ourselves, there's nothing wrong with being model train enthusiasts, nothing wrong at all. And the world went on. We fell in love and got married and had wonderful and not so wonderful children. And there were triumphs and tragedies, just like always. Now and then small attacks surfaced in one form or another, but life continued, since we'd imagined the worst, and it had been much worse than anything that had happened. Let's hope that this post-11 will be a precursor to our collective post-COVID-19, and that soon we'll all be back to some semblance of normalcy, going to the movies, seeing plays and concerts, going out to eat and meeting at bars, learning again to not be afraid of what we cannot see. And with that, I bid adieu. Thanks for sharing this time with me. Thank you, Ethan. I imagine there are only about 16 or 17 of you out there listening, but that is wonderful. Thank you.